Hello, 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 and welcome. This is the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. We're a little bit late today. We had a bit of a mad panic. I misplaced my stories, and Michael and I down here at Arrow were running around the studio trying to find them. I'd actually left them behind last week, so sorry, we're a little bit late today. We're about 5 minutes late, but we'll just skip some music and we'll be fine. I've got a good story for you today. And what this is all about, it's not just about my stories, my adventures around the world and around New Zealand, but it's also about depression. It's about dealing with depression, and one of the worst enemies that you can have when you're suffering from depression is a lack of sleep. Now, I got about 2 hours last night, so I'm not feeling the greatest, but one day you can handle, you can survive one day, but when it becomes 2 days, 3 days, that's one of the signs that you're suffering from depression, is when you can't get any sleep. Some people sleep too much, but for most people you become an insomniac, and that really mucks with you. That is your worst enemy. The most important thing is to get some decent sleep when you're suffering, when you're in a bad way, and you've got to do that no matter what it takes. Doctors are very, very reluctant to hand out sleeping pills because they can be addictive, and of course people sometimes try and kill themselves with them and booze, so yeah, sleeping pills aren't the greatest answer, and exercise is really the key. You know, that's been a big turnaround for me. I walk a lot more now. Breath of fresh air can really help clear your head, and all those busy thoughts in your mind, you get worried and anxious, and you go over and over and over things until they drive you crazy. So getting out, getting a bit of fresh air, seeing a few things, even taking up a hobby or a sport can make a huge difference, an absolutely massive difference to the way that you feel and the way that you live. Eating regularly, that's something I don't do. That's very important too. So you've got to make the effort, and if you make a little bit of effort, you'll find that you will get some reward for it. It's not all effort, there are some rewarding things, but most importantly your friends and your family, they will help you more than anything else. Alright, time to get on with today's story, and today we got one from New Zealand, from when I was fishing out at Tora. It's near White Rock, out on the east coast, and it's an amazing spot. Very beautiful, very rugged, damn dangerous, but a great spot, and anyone living in the Wairarapa should definitely go out there and check it out. It is really beautiful. You go out through Martinborough, over the Wakapunis, and follow your nose, and you'll hit the coast, and she's a primo place. There are still power out there, not many. The place has been pretty badly flogged like most places, but there's still a few to be had. And very good fishing, but isolated, dangerous, no coast guards. So if you are going to venture out there, be well equipped, know what you're doing, take all the safety gear. You really, really need it out there. But she's a magnificent part of the country, and we are blessed with so many absolutely beautiful places in the Wairarapa. We are blessed, and you really need to make the effort to go out and see them, and you will be rewarded. They're things that stay in the memory a long, long time. Yeah, okay. Story from Tora. Pieces of silver. The old mate, who I'll refer to as Tom for short, woke me about 4:30 a.m. one morning in spring. I was staying in a large caravan out the back of his place. We were in the middle of fishing for groper and had a few more tons to land. I sprung out of bed as I knew we had a big day ahead of us. Work clothes were hurriedly pulled on, and I stumbled into the darkness towards the flat deck ute. "All right, mate," said Tom as he handed me a coffee and fired up the ute. We headed up to the refrigerated container that holds boxes of bait and took 6 for the day's fishing trip. We then loaded up 140 litres of diesel from the main tank and headed down to the road to the bulldozer and boat. It was still dark when we arrived and filled the tanks and stowed the gear. I put on all my wet weather overalls and started cutting baits. Barracuda frozen whole is easiest filleted solid, but it freezes the hands fast. Despite the numbness and the razor-sharp blade, I worked as fast as I could go. We needed 300 baits of cuda and squid prepared before we reached the fishing grounds. It would take my best efforts to be ready on time, and Tom would accept no excuses. Right on the first hint of light, Tora drove over on his quad bike, ready to back the boat into the sea using a large metal cradle and a D9 Caterpillar bulldozer. The drawbar connecting the bulldozer to the cradle was about 15 metres, so was able to get us into deep enough water from the beach. But beach launches are never easy. Still, he backs us into the water with a great puff of black smoke and some consummate skill. Tom kicks over the 2 D4 Caterpillar engines on board, and they bark into life on demand. He listens carefully as he warms up the motors for any hint of a problem, which must be addressed before we head out. With nothing obviously untoward, he engages the twin Hamilton jets they drive and swings us round to face the ocean. Meanwhile, it's back to baits for me. Head down, but the smell is quite bearable as everything we use has been frozen fresh, and fresh is the key. Tom goes through the motions of checking the gear, first the electronics, then the jets, then a knowing eye over the hauling gear, and finally over me and the hundreds of traces behind me that we will be sending to the bottom in a few hours. Happy that all is in order, Tom opens up the motors and puts on some Johnny Cash as he plots a path down to the fishing grounds. I feel the boat's bow rise to the challenge and try to move in rhythm with her so as not to slice my hands, now rather numb. Tom buries his head in the navigational gear after putting on the kettle, and I have a tiny break as I make the coffee. The sun is rising magnificently today, and it lights up the gnarly coastal cliffs all orange, red and blue, with wisps of mist still licking the gullies. We have only minutes to take in the view before it's back to toil. For after cutting a few hundred baits, the traces must be baited up and laid out ready for later. We lose no time as the engines roar on, and the jets push us along at a good 30 knots. It's not easy getting all the baits ready in time, but I battle on and check all the main lines, floats, anchors, clips, traces and ropes in sequence, exactly how Tom showed me. Everything must run like clockwork, or it could cost us in gear, injury, or even our lives, and this is the most dangerous occupation there is. Satisfied that all is in order, I report briefly to my skipper, and he glances over everything himself for satisfaction. "That's good. Now cut some more bait, would you?" is all he has to say, then turns his attention back to the engines and electronics. Out here, our roles are very much changed, and it is important we function as a unit. Tom becomes the skipper, and must make decisions quickly and without impedance. I must follow orders with understanding and as quickly as possible. No hesitation or misunderstanding can be tolerated, or the consequences could be dire for us both. At times, this necessity tests both patience and friendship, but we approach it from the angle of understanding, so we can work safely and quickly together. The hours pass so quickly I scarcely have time to have all ready as we arrive on the grounds we call the holes. They are a series of cliff faces rising steeply from the abyss, a place where current is naturally churned up by the changing tides. We have coincided our arrival with the turning of the tide, a time when countless of billions of plankton rise from the depths of nighttime to photosynthesize during the morning. They turn the sea a beautiful green with their vast numbers and fill our hearts with expectation. The timing of our arrival is crucial, and the tides are erratic, influenced by more subtle forces than the moon alone. Old skippers, now long gone, taught Tom the secrets of this place decades ago when the Italians and Greeks fished these places. Now that they're gone, Tom is one of the last with the knowledge which is the crucial difference between success and failure. We cannot see the plankton on the fish-finding gear, the electronics not being sensitive enough, but what preys on them is clearly evident. With jaw-dropping clarity, we see 15 to 25 metres deep of an uncountable swarm of tiny fish of many different species following up and feeding on the tiny plankton. Most of these fish are never seen by humans, and much of their lives remains a mystery, as this is a truly wild and far-flung corner of the world. What feed on them is our glittering prize, our pieces of silver. Groper are our target species today, fishing in a depth of approximately 250 metres. Above them are bluenose, a delectable but less valuable species we will also take, and below the groper are bass. A related if somewhat uglier species, the bass are every bit as good to eat and pay the same good money. The more groper we catch, however, the happier we will be. 100 fish for the day is our unspoken rule for a really good day, but they are few and far between. Today looks especially good. Tom snoops around with his electronic gear, cruising slowly over the cliff faces as the sonar shows signs of promise everywhere. We're in no rush at this point, as timing is everything. We must have our baits at exactly the right place and depth to get amongst our prize, so we must sum up our line of attack before we move. During this time, the most incredible transition begins to take place. Until now, we have been tracked by the great royal albatross. They have been soaring majestically high up on the thermals, watching and waiting patiently. Now as we slow, they descend with anticipation of an ensuing feast. And they are only the first wave. Other albatross and mollymawk, a little smaller, arrive on the scene. Half a dozen soon become many dozens of these magnificent masters of the sky. In turn, these attract other ocean-going birds like painted pigeons which swim under the water as if they were flying. Within half an hour, we already have a small city of chattering birds moving expectantly before a bait has touched the water. We come around again, along the now plotted course, and begin our fishing in earnest. We start by tying an anchor or pick at the bottom of the main line, and then lower this by hand until after a few metres we start clipping on traces with a baited hook at the other end. Each main line takes 25 to 33 baited hooks over some 50 metres in length. The main line in turn is attached to rope which is knotted every 50 metres so we can count it out as it descends the depths. This job must be done at breakneck speed, so the anchor finds exactly the right spot on the cliff face where the groper are feeding. Tom must calculate drift as well as drop. Only the experience of many thousands of drops has taught him the right way. As the first drop speeds away, Tom keeps one eye on the sonar as I count out 200 metres of rope, then tie 2 large floats to the top and send them off to mark the drop. Tom marks it for reference on the plotter. We move on to the next cliff face and the procedure starts again, then a third and a fourth. By the time we have finished 4 drops and stopped for a cup of coffee, it is time to go back to the beginning and start hauling. I hook up the large floats over the davit arm and Tom engages the hydraulic hauler. As the rope tenses up, we can feel the groper wriggling on the end. The myriad of birds seems to anticipate the action as the first few hooks come up empty. Tom unclips the traces and I remove the now used baits and throw them overboard to the noisy waiting birds. But soon we see colour, and 6 beautiful silver grey groper float to the surface, each weighing about 10 kilos. Tom unclips them and I remove the hooks so they can be gutted immediately. We rebait and drop the line again and slowly motor up to the next line as Tom expertly removes their heads with great thwacks of his large knife. He then slices their bellies open and quickly removes all of the guts from these beasts and hurls it overboard, and pandemonium breaks out amongst the birds. The huge royal albatross barge their way in using their hooked beaks to tear the large livers and other offal before it sinks down. Small groups of squabbling birds are left in our wake as smaller birds pick off what they can from the albatross. The second line is more successful, and a dozen groper come up, and I am soon hard at work on my knees, flushing out blood from the carcasses with a seawater hose and cleaning off any remaining guts. I am soon covered in blood and guts, but ignore it as this slowly turns into a good day's catch. The third line is better still, with some 20 fish landing on deck, and we increase the pace. The fish are going down the hold as quickly as I can manage, but I have trouble keeping up the pace as Tom hews and hacks at a mighty rate. At least 3 dozen albatross alone are now squabbling and gorging themselves as we resemble a city of birds on the water. The fourth line, which promises to make our day, starts to come up, then suddenly straightens and slows, then starts again. Tom and I shoot each other worried glances as we hesitate. We stare down into the depths for answers as the first hooks come up straightened out, as if some massive fish have torn both the bait and fish from the traces. A few more great tugs, and it dawns upon us that we are being robbed. We stare down into the green depths for answers, and slowly the huge black shape of a whale comes into view, plucking the groper off the hooks like a bunch of grapes. Stunned at the audacity of these creatures, we are mesmerised for a minute, as we are helpless to respond. "Dirty, rotten bastards," swears Tom under his breath, as the pod of whales starts to ascend, their black and white markings coming into view. Due to their great bulk, our little hooks have no effect on them, and they are free to rob us at will. "Get the gear in as quick as you can," shouts Tom, concerned that we might snag up on a whale and lose some gear. At the same time, I see another whale coming up behind us. At 15 metres, it is as long as our boat, and it floats right up to the stern, almost touching the jet with its nose. "Pilot whales," informs Tom, as I stare, as captivated by this great beast as he is with our boat. We then break into action to retrieve our gear as quickly as possible. As we do so, it becomes obvious that we have been defeated in our efforts. Not by the elements or our elusive prey, but a pod of robbing whales. All 4 lines have been similarly decimated, so we are forced to retrieve gear and pack it away as the whales hover all around, checking us out. They are so close we can see their eyes, and I cannot help but think there is some undeniable intelligence behind them. What should have been a successful day of at least 100 groper has suddenly been curtailed into only 38 slabs of valuable silver. We managed to retrieve all the gear and are forced to turn for home early, beaten by our curious company. We make it back to the landing by midday, and seeking solace in the fact we have at least made wages for the day, but rue the fact it could have been so much better. We will be back there soon to try our luck again, as this was a rare meeting with these Goliaths of the deep. Still, it was an experience that will stay in our minds for years to come. The end. Well, looky there. 2 minutes to spare. That wasn't bad. Sorry we had no music today. I certainly will play you some next week. We're a little bit disorganised this week, having lost my precious stories. Good Lord. I just about had a heart attack when I couldn't find them. I don't know if I could ever rewrite those stories. You need a bit of inspiration, and you get this memory floods back of this most wonderful time. I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget those whales as long as I live. It was special, even although we got robbed and we didn't make the money we should have. It was a hell of an experience, and we used to go a long way down the coast, way past White Rock, halfway down to the lighthouse down there at Cape Palliser, and it was a long way from anywhere, and I always felt quite vulnerable, and I always thought, crikey, if the skipper ever falls on his blade or anything like that and I have to bring the boat back home, we are going to struggle to get back home in one piece. And I always felt very vulnerable out there, and you realise just how dangerous it is. A lot of people die fishing, and you're dealing with machinery, a rocking boat, sharp knives, bloody great big knives, hooks, all kinds of stuff like that, and an accident can occur so easily. You've really got to be on your game. I only did it for a year because I couldn't handle it. Physically, it was absolutely brutal. So bad, after 3 days, you couldn't stand up straight for another 2. So, yeah, she's a hard way to make a living, but I really admire the people that live off the land and the sea. It's a unique life, and very rare these days. Most of us live in towns and cities, and it is an amazing life, something that I really miss. And yeah, Stu, if you ever hear these stories, I'm sure you'll laugh and remember those good days. Well, that's me for another week. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'll bring you another one next week, and talk a little bit more about my pet subject. Until then, look after each other, especially anyone suffering from depression, and you never know, you just might save a life, and what a wonderful thing that would be. Okay, thanks for now. See you later.